We'll start off with an update on Russia's invasion into Ukraine. And I wanted to focus primarily on what civilians in Ukraine are currently dealing with. Some of the news from the weekend is pretty terrible. So I just want to give you all a warning. Some of the videos that we're going to show are graphic, sensitive. Just want to make sure you're aware of that before we move on. With that said, let's talk about it. Russian troops are either directly targeting civilians or are attempting to essentially carry out their invasion in a way that completely disregards the lives of civilians as they continue to shell major cities and towns across the country. Now, what we know from the weekend is a story that got a lot of attention involved one family that was attempting to flee their town to Kyiv in an attempt to essentially evacuate the country eventually. And what ended up happening was a specific bridge that had already been destroyed by Ukraine in order to slow the Russians down in their invasion of Kyiv was targeted yet again by Russia. And this is the same bridge that civilians are still attempting to use in an effort to evacuate the country. So before we get to the details on that story, let me give you the current conservative death toll among Ukrainian civilians. The office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights said that 1,123 civilian casualties in Ukraine have been verified, 364 killed, including 25 children, and 759 injured. And they say that, look, this is an underestimate. They are intentionally and purposely, careful with the death tolls that they put out. So the number is expected to rise, not only from, verification of, people who have already died, but this war is still going on. Russia has unfortunately intensified its attacks on Ukraine. And so of course the death toll unfortunately is going to increase. Now I want to show you this map. This is a satellite image of the bridge that I was talking about. So the civilians that I'm talking about were attempting to use the path of this bridge to go from Irpin to Kyiv. And then after that, they were supposed to try to evacuate the country. Russia had agreed to creating these safe corridors for civilians to evacuate the country, but they have reneged on that promise, and unfortunately, they have continued, targeting these "quote unquote" safe corridors, and civilians are, of course, not feeling safe in using those so-called corridors to evacuate. Now, crowds of hundreds have clustered around the damaged bridge over the Irpin River since Saturday. Ukrainian forces had blown up the bridge earlier to slow the Russian advance. Only a dozen or so Ukrainian soldiers were in the immediate area of the bridge on Sunday, not fighting, but helping carry civilians' luggage and children. And so the mortar shells fell first 100 or so yards from the bridge, then shifted in a series of thunderous blasts into a section of the street where the people were fleeing. Now, the New York Times was on the scene as this happened, and so I want to go to the first video that shows what happened, okay? Again, difficult video to watch, but it shows evidence of what transpired as these civilians were trying to evacuate the country. Let's watch.
Що вчора було з дітьми, кажеш?
Погано було. Дітей 200-х вивозили, мирне населення, маленькі. Смотрите его!
All right.
Stay there!
All right.
No, okay.
So to give you some more details about the number of people who died as a result of that attack, a shell landed in the street, sending up a cloud of concrete dust and leaving one family, a woman, her teenage son, and her daughter, who appeared to be about 8 years old, and a family friend sprawled on the ground. Soldiers rushed to help, but the woman and the children were dead. The man traveling with them still had a pulse, but was unconscious and severely wounded. He died later. The shelling suggested either targeting of the evacuation routes from Irpin, something of which the Ukrainian authorities have accused the Russian army after a railroad track used for evacuations was hit on Saturday, or disregard for the risk of civilian casualties. And we have other examples to share with you, but Cenk, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here that are important to point out. First, it doesn't matter if they were killed accidentally or they were killed on purpose. The invasion was on purpose. So you don't get to say later, oh, I invaded a country on purpose and accidentally killed hundreds, and then with this rate, it'll be thousands pretty soon of their civilians. Oops. No, it's the same thing. And by the way, we hold that standard for everyone. So when America did that and hundreds of thousands of civilians died in Iraq, same thing. I mean, when the American government said, oh, we were taking great care to not have civilian casualties. Well, then you suck at your job because hundreds of thousands of them died. So you apparently did not take great care, or you're not very good at your job. Besides which, when you invade a country, thousands of civilians die. That's what happens. Putin knew that, the Russian government knew that. They did it on purpose in terms of the invasion. Now, second part of it is, in the beginning, they were either showing extra care or pretending to show extra care about not bombing civilians. I believe the reason for that was that they were hoping to be greeted as liberators. They probably drank their own Kool-Aid. Same thing happened here in America with the invasion of Iraq. Dick Cheney said literally the same words, we would be greeted as liberators. They would throw roses at our feet, and other conservatives said. And so there was a little bit of surprise when they did throw roses at our feet. But after that surprise is over, both America and Russia decided, no, let's do mass bombings, risking far greater civilian casualties. And that's certainly where Russia is right now. And guys, the New York Times reporters happened to be there and capture those 4 people unfortunately passing away, including that 8-year-old. But understand the hundreds of other civilians that died in Ukraine, the cameras didn't happen to be there, but they died just the same way. And same is true of all the civilians you didn't see die in Yemen, where Saudi Arabia is doing it, Syria, where Russia is doing it, and again, Iraq, where America did it.
So we have other examples, and these stories are just incredibly heartbreaking, and it shows what the cost of war is. Innocent people getting caught in this just complete devastating situation. One Ukrainian man lost 5 members of his family this past weekend on Sunday. He spoke to the press about it. Let's watch.
The small country road is now lined by piles of rubble, burned out cars, collapsed homes, and a deep crater where a Russian missile struck. The attack, caught on a village security camera, hit the home of Igor Muzhiev in the small village of Marhelivka, about 15 miles south of Kyiv, where he lived with his family. Now they're gone, killed in an instant. 5 family members and a friend, including his 12-year-old daughter, who was disabled in an accident with a drunk driver, his wife, just 46 years old, and his son-in-law, the father of his grandchildren.
And that's just one of many stories that are all over the news, the internet, because these are, again, innocent people who are either getting severely injured, losing their homes, losing members of their own families. And this is all happening with the backdrop of Putin and Russian troops claiming that they are not targeting civilians, that they're strategically targeting the Ukrainian military, and that's it. The evidence proves otherwise. We're seeing complete and utter destruction of schools, of hospitals, journalists even getting caught in the crossfire as a result of this. And so that's what appears to be the reality on the ground. Again, it's really difficult to give a firm death toll because the numbers are changing. It's a fluid situation, but there's no question that civilians are dying in this Russian invasion.
Yeah, and so I want to explain and defeat whataboutism here. So when I mention Yemen or Iraq, that is not whataboutism. That is, for example, Yemen is going on right now. So Saudis are massacring civilians in just the way that you saw, but in Yemen, and the world largely doesn't care, and certainly America doesn't care. Whataboutism is, hey, it's happening in Yemen, so don't worry about Ukraine. Wait, that doesn't make any sense. You should worry about both, not worry about neither. And whataboutism is America did something wrong recently or 20 years ago, so Putin isn't doing something wrong. No, that's outrageous and ridiculous. So if you see anyone using legitimate facts about the things that other countries have done wrong, but in an effort to defend Putin and his aggression and his crimes against humanity and this absurd invasion, understand that they are not honest actors.
100%.
They basically are doing propaganda for Putin and the Russian government, and they're some of the most disgusting people on earth.
Yeah, look, I think that adults and people who think critically about these things and aren't interested in pushing propaganda can hold two thoughts at the same time. You can be critical of US foreign policy, as we've been, because it's justified and it's evidence-based. And you can also criticize the illegal invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin and the Russian troops. Anyone who uses whataboutism, it's even worse than that. It's a way of providing cover for what Putin is doing right now when the whataboutism is used. It's a way of deflecting what's currently happening in Ukraine and immediately diverting attention to the naughty behavior of the United States, which in this particular case has not done anything wrong. The United States actually, first of all, is not the one invading Ukraine right now. I'm impressed with how measured the Biden administration continues to be, not at all buying the argument that we need to implement some sort of no-fly zone, which would be a complete and utter disaster. I think that, again, you can hold two thoughts at the same time. But what I do see quite often, especially among leftists online, is this need to immediately minimize what Putin is doing or provide cover for what Putin is doing by immediately distracting people with the wrongdoings of the United States government. It just doesn't make sense in this case. And if the US does do something wrong, I think it makes sense to call them out. But let's just keep it real right now. Putin is the one who has done this invasion. Civilians are dying as a result of this invasion, and he's not letting up. He's only intensifying this. Another example of whataboutism is, you have wonderful Russian citizens who are putting their lives on the line to protest this war in Russia. They get arrested. Putin gets criticism for it, as he should. And then you even see people saying, well, I mean, it's not like the United States arrests protests or protesters. Yeah, we saw that happen in the summer of 2020. We should be critical of that. But we shouldn't point to that as a way of justifying or providing cover for what Putin's doing in Russia.
Yeah, so it's not at all complicated. Be fair about your critique of all countries, including the United States and including Russia. It's not hard at all. So look, the great majority of Putin's defenders here in America are right-wing. And then I would say the second largest category is fake left, who's pretending to be on the left, but is actually totally right wing, but specifically, especially when it comes to Russia. And you will see them make every justification for Putin's actions and blame Ukraine, blame the West, etc. In this case, it's a particularly stark example because a lot of things in the world are not black and white. And so, especially when it's more vague, it's easier for those forces to say, oh, it was all America's fault. America's fault. None of it is Putin's fault. Poor Putin, misunderstood by the world, okay? And by the way, some things are America's fault. So that's why it's even more complicated. But in this case, we have a very stark example, and it's clarified things completely. Putin definitely started this war. Anyone who says otherwise is either out of their minds for some weirdo leftover agenda from 40, 50 years ago, but that's a tiny percentage, or more likely, literally propagandists for Putin. So whether they're on the right wing or the pretend left, saying that Putin is in anyway the victim here or didn't start this war is counterfactual. Putin definitely started the war. He's definitely responsible for those civilian deaths. He's a warmonger, imperialist of the first order, and any progressive would be against the imperialism of Russia under Putin. Anyone saying otherwise is not on the left. They're just either fans of Putin for some insane, bizarre reason that they should go see their therapist about, or they're paid propagandists for the current Russian government.
And just going back to the safe corridors that Russia had agreed to, but then reneged on that promise. Ukraine apparently dismissed a Kremlin proposal to evacuate hundreds of thousands of people, not to the west, but to Russia and its ally Belarus, as a cynical attempt to distract from its failure to stop shelling evacuation corridors where civilians are attempting to flee. Like, what a joke. What an absolute joke. Yeah, I'm sure Ukrainian civilians want to evacuate to the country that's being led by the very person who invaded their country to begin with. Just absolute joke.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.